Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I'm Derek Blackburn. I am your host today. Please continue to say hello by way of using the chat function to introduce yourself and share with us who you are and where you are in the world. So a few people from Nottingham I see. Jazz, I see you're at Nottingham Trent University. I nearly went to Nottingham Trent University actually many years ago, but I declined your offer and went to Sheffield instead. So there you go. Could have been. But welcome, and we will be getting things underway in just a couple of moments. So thank you very much for coming in. And as you can see there from Susie's letting you know, we will be sending out the recording to you later. And specific questions around the content today, then please pop those into the Q&A rather than into the chat, and then we can answer those as we go, or answer them at the end, but definitely we can answer them for you. So I'm just going to hang on another 30 seconds and then we'll make a start. So thank you everyone for being prompt. And we'll be underway very quickly. Great. So let's make a start then, folks. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. My name is Derek Blackburn, and well, let me tell you a little bit about who I am. This is me, an older photograph, as you can see. So I'm head of skills delivery here at Coaching Focus, and I'm responsible primarily for designing and delivering our ILM accredited coaching programs and also our highly acclaimed Leader as Coach program. I first trained as an internal coach in the late 1990s when I was part of the senior leadership team at EGG. And if any of you are familiar with the coach Miles Downey, he's written quite a few books on coaching. Then Miles Downey was one of the coaches that worked with the startup team and the senior leadership team at EGG. So that was kind of my first exposure to coaching, and I am myself a qualified ILM coach. So welcome along, and for those of you who've just joined, then please, if you've got any questions as I go through the content, then please drop those into the Q&A, and then we can pick those up and see those separately from the chat. And again, if you've just joined, just to let you know that we will be sending out a recording of today's session afterwards. So enjoy, and we love to hear from you as we go through. So folks, let me start by talking about what our session goals are today. So I want to make sure that we understand what we mean by everyday coaching conversations. And I want you to be able to recognize these in the workplace, because they, if you're not tuned into what an everyday coaching conversation is, then it takes a while for you to acclimatize to that. Here's something that I really want you to think about, that to understand that the purpose of coaching is to be useful and not helpful. And I want you to think about why might this present you with some challenges to overcome. Because if you're in a people leader role, if you're a manager and you have a team of people that report to you, then you'll usually want to be helpful. But coaching is not about being helpful necessarily, it's about being useful. And there is a difference, and I'll explore that difference with you. I also want to introduce you to something, if you're not familiar with, that a great coach called Michael Bungay-Stanier, he categorizes this as your advice monster. And that advice monster is that little voice in your head that is wanting to give the answers to people all the time. And again, giving the answers to people all the time is not what coaching is about. And if we keep giving the answers to people all the time, then they'll keep coming back to us with their issues and their challenges. And really utilizing everyday coachable moments is about helping people think for themselves. So we'll look at taming our advice monster, and then we'll invite you to consider what might your next steps be then on your journey to utilizing everyday coachable conversations. So let's think about, let me share with you very briefly what I'm going to do today. I'm going to define coaching and everyday coachable moments so we get a clear definition of what we're working with. I want to very briefly just explore the different hats that we wear at work, because the different hats that we wear at work will impact the context within which we have everyday coachable conversations. And I want to use the analogy of why I think everyday coachable conversations are like buses. I like analogies. I think analogies bring things to life for people. So I'll share with you why I think everyday coaching conversations are like buses, but what that means for us. Because let's be honest, we've all stood at a bus stop and either got on the wrong bus going in the wrong direction, or sometimes the bus is full and we're not able to get on. So we want to think about what that means for us. I want to share with you just the key skills of coaching, so we understand what are the skills that we need as a manager, as a people leader, in order to be able to utilize these everyday coaching conversations. And then I want to explain something called the range of approaches and have you reflect on that a little bit, because that's where we can start to notice where our advice monster rears its ugly head. And so it's important that we know that there are a range of approaches available to us when we're having these conversations. But very often, our default position is utilizing our advice monster. So that's the outline for today. I hope that that will take till round about 12:30, about 25 minutes, and then we'll be able to leave some time for questions after that. And so as the questions pop up, then please, as I say, drop them into the Q&A rather than dropping them into the chat, and then we won't miss them. So thank you very much. Here we go then. So what is coaching? Well, as you can appreciate, anybody who and everybody who writes a book on coaching has a definition in there. The one that we tend to use at Coaching Focus is actually this one from Miles Downing. So coaching is the art of facilitating the performance, the learning and development of another. So if you just have a look at that for a moment and just reflect on that sentence for a moment, what we're really saying here is that this is an art, not a science. Yeah, so I hope everybody gets that. There is no one size style, framework, methodology that works for everybody when it comes to coaching, because it's an art and not a science. But coaching is all about facilitating the performance, the learning and development of another. And as managers, as people leaders, that's something that we are constantly considering when we interact with our colleagues, we interact with our team members. How can we help them do their job even better than they're doing already? And the whole thing with coaching is that you don't have to be ill to get better. We just want to help people in this journey to improvement. So that's our overarching definition of coaching. And if we then think about an everyday coaching conversation, then here's a little definition for you to ponder as well. So an everyday coaching conversation is an informal, usually impromptu opportunity to have a quick conversation with a colleague to help them develop their thinking. And just so we can start to recognize when these everyday coaching conversation opportunities present themselves, I've gone on to say that it will typically last 15 to 20 minutes. And it starts when somebody appears at your desk, whether that's face-to-face, virtual, metaphorical as it were, and they ask you for help. So once someone approaches you and says, Derek, can you help me with this, please? I'm stuck. Can I talk to you about this? That's the opportunity for a everyday coaching conversation. And the reason I say kind of 15 to 20 minutes for this, folks, is because anything longer than that, and you're likely to need to put an appointment in the diary to discuss it formally. And we know how these conversations usually start, don't we? Because somebody appears at your desk and says, oh, have you got a minute? Ah, that famous minute. Yeah, if only we counted up all those minutes that people ask us for, because it's typically 15 to 20 minutes. But a 15 to 20 minute conversation allows us the opportunity to explore the situation in more detail and start to generate options and solutions for the issue and the challenge that people are sharing with us. So it's an informal, usually impromptu opportunity to have a quick conversation with a colleague to help them develop their thinking. Now, at the end of today's session, folks, I'm going to ask you to think about your next steps, but I want to start you thinking about your next steps early on in this conversation, because I want you to think about, how do I communicate with my team what an everyday coaching conversation is? Because if I, as a leader and a manager, am the only person looking for this, Sometimes I'll spot them, sometimes I won't. But if my team, my colleagues know what an everyday coaching conversation is like and what we want the benefits of that to be, then we can have everybody looking for them. And if everybody's looking for those opportunities to perform better, learn and develop, then that makes it easier for us. So one of the things that you might want to think about after today is, how do I communicate with my colleagues that I'm actually looking to change the nature of the conversation that I have with them? And I won't be telling them what to do anymore, but I'll be inviting them to think about and come up with a solution to the issue and the challenge. So think about how we communicate with people what we mean by an everyday coaching conversation. I want now just to focus, folks, on the kind of the context within which these conversations take place. And I want you to think about, in your role as a line manager, as a people leader, then we typically wear 3 hats. Okay, and the 3 hats that we wear the hat as a leader, we wear the hat as a manager, and we wear the hat as a coach. And if you think about that, you are, if you like, constantly flipping one hat on, taking the another off, changing the hat that you wear. Sometimes you're being a leader, sometimes you're being manager, and sometimes you have the opportunity to be a coach. And if you think about it, and we haven't got time to go into this in huge detail today, but when I'm being a leader, then effectively what I am doing is articulating a game worth playing to the rest of the team. Yeah, so when I lead, I articulate the game that's worth playing. In other words, can I get people excited enough to want to come to work and do a great job every day? Then when I put my manager hat on, effectively what I'm doing now is I am managing, policing, looking after the rules of the game. So when we have our manager hat on, we are typically looking at performance, KPIs, appraisals, targets, all those kind of things that are necessary in order for the organization and the team to function effectively and efficiently. So the manage hat can be summarized as looking after the rules of the game. And then when it comes to the coach hat, that is me utilizing these opportunities for everyday coaching conversations and helping each and every member of my team play their best game. Yeah, so when I'm wearing my coach's hat, I want people to play their best game. Now, why wouldn't people want to play their best game? And yet sometimes we find that they don't, but that's again something that we can explore on another occasion. What I want you to just do for now though, folks, is just think about, if you think about those 3 hats, you're a leader, you're a manager, and you're a coach, so your role is multifunctional and you're swapping hats. I just want you to think about, what is the hat that you wear most of the time? Yeah, so if you just take a moment for a bit of self-reflection and you come up with 3 numbers that add up to 100% for your lead hat, your manage hat, and your coach hat, think what that might be for you. And when we ask this question on our workshops, what we typically find is that for most people in most organizations, they're wearing that manager hat 60 to 70% of the time. So in other words, people's default hat, depending obviously on their role and responsibilities within the organization, but most people leaders wear that manager hat 60 to 70% of the time. And so the lead and coach hat is between 30 to 40% of the time. And please don't think that we're suggesting we should wear our coach's hat for 100% of the time, because that's absolutely not the case. What I do want you to think about though is, could I wear my coach's hat a bit more often? And actually, could I blend the lead and coach hat more often than what I've probably got at the moment, which is the lead manage? Yeah, so most of our people leaders that we interact with spend their time more leading and managing and less coaching. And what we really want you to think about is more leading and coaching and less managing. But just start to notice, start to become aware of, what is the default hat that you wear when you walk into your organization every morning? Because if your default hat is the manager hat, and for most managers it is, just invite yourself to think about what would it take for me to wear my coach's hat more often, more of the time? And if I wore my coach's hat more often, more of the time, what kind of conversations would I have and be having as a result of that? And just to finish off this diagram, folks, where the three circles overlap, I've put in there the letter P, and that's the P of performance, because ultimately what we're about, when we combine leading, we combine managing, we combine coaching, it's about people performing to their very best. And what we've got here is a line down the middle, and this line is the power line. So when I'm operating to the left of the line, the power is with the manager. When I'm operating to the right of the line, the power is with my coachee, my colleague that I'm working with. So I want to be operating more to the right of the line more often than to the left of the line. And don't think I'm suggesting, folks, that there aren't times when I need to be wearing my manager's hat, because obviously there are. But I just want you to think about spending more time with your coach's hat on. And actually what we're trying to create here is effectively a three-legged stool, if you like, of performance. So I get the right amount of leading, the right amount of managing, and the right amount of coaching, and that enables me then to facilitate performance. So just take a moment and reflect on yourself for the lead hat, the manage hat, and the coach hat, and the percentages that you wear. And then moving on from there, then let's focus a bit on these everyday coaching conversations. And why do I say they're like buses? Well, for these reasons, really. The everyday coaching conversation opportunities come along regularly. They present themselves because, again, if you take a step back and think about how often do people appear at your desk asking for help, whether that's physical or virtual, it's probably a lot. But can you get on every bus that comes along? No. Sometimes they don't stop, do they? They go past. And what I mean by that in everyday coaching conversation terms is sometimes there's an operational imperative that you need to give somebody the answer right here, right now. The business won't survive if you take 20 minutes out to stop and think about the issue that's presented itself. This person needs an answer because they've got a customer on the line, a client on the line, or whatever it might be. So I have to tell somebody what to do this time. I have to give them the answer. What I'm saying is, though, there will be another coachable moment along soon. So you can actually utilize, if not this coachable moment, then the next one. And what I also want to say is that you can utilize everyday coaching conversation opportunities retrospectively. So if a colleague comes to you and asks for help and they need that help right there, right then, by all means, give them the answer, give them the solution. But then think about taking the opportunity afterwards to catch up with them for 10, 15 minutes and just explain to them the thinking and the rationale so that next time they're facing a similar situation, they don't need to come to you for a solution. They actually come to you, well, either they don't need to come to you at all, or they come to you having already thought about what the solution might be. So we can utilize everyday coaching conversations retrospectively, not just there and then in the moment. What you need to think about, though, folks, is if it is your natural reaction to give somebody the answer every time, then that's a behavioral habit that you will need to change. And we all know that as adults, changing behaviors is never easy, is it? Yeah, whether you're introducing a new health and fitness regime, a new dieting regime, a new teeth regime. Yeah, so I went to see the hygienist and suddenly I'm flossing to within an inch of my life and all those sorts of things. But it takes a while for us to get into the habit of the new things. So it will take a while for us to start to recognize these coachable moments and then to start to utilize them. But my point with all this, folks, is that we need to know what a bus is. And by that, what I mean is need to know what an everyday coaching conversation is and where the opportunities present themselves, where the bus stops are. So I know I'm standing in the right place to catch them. And I need to know where we're headed. So why am I wanting to utilize these conversations? What's my goal? Well, if my goal is to develop the people around me and to help and support them, then they need to know that that's what I'm going to be doing. Because over a period of time, if people start to get in the habit of every time I go ask Derek a question, I know he's going to ask me, what do I think? So he's going to ask me, what's the solution or what's a possible solution? I better do some thinking before I appear at his desk. Otherwise, I'm just going to look stupid. And of course, the first time or two that we start asking people what they think, you might get a bit of a blank expression, but ride through that and you'll be fine. So just using an analogy there, everyday coaching conversations, they're like buses. They do come along regularly, but you've got to spot them. You've got to know what they look like. You've got to know to be in the right place at the right time. Being in the right mindset yourself is really important with everyday coaching conversations. Yeah, sometimes you've had enough for today. You haven't got the energy, the capacity, the bandwidth, I think is the expression, for a 15 to 20-minute conversation. Sometimes the other person hasn't. Yeah, they've had a really tough day. They've been on the phones all day. They've been getting in the neck from customers. They just need to be told what to do today. They haven't got time. They haven't got the capacity mentally right now to deal with this. And that's why we won't be able to utilize everyone. But we need to keep persevering. We need to keep sharing with our colleagues what we're looking to do and move on from there. So here's something else to think about, folks. If you have a coaching as part of your role, and you may be coaching formally, semi-formally within your organization, everyday coaching conversations are your practice technique and your opportunity to practice your techniques for your coaching. Because if you're in a business and you have a part-time role as a workplace coach, you may be coaching 2 or 3 coachees at a time, unless you're a full-time coach. Yeah, because you've got a day job to do and you're coaching 2 or 3 other coachees. Well, coaching 2 or 3 other coachees leaves you 2 or 3 hours of actual coaching per month. The everyday coaching conversation opportunities present the opportunity for you as a coach to practice your skills. And you can practice the skills in a 15, 20-minute conversation that you can then utilize in your hour-long conversation. So it's really important to recognize this is your training ground, if you like, for your more formal coaching sessions, because it gives you the opportunity to practice those skills. And as we know, when it comes to coaching, practice makes perfect. So do see these if you are a workplace coach and a qualified workplace coach, and that forms part of your role and responsibilities, see this as the opportunity for practicing. So I just want to very briefly, if you're not familiar with the key skills of coaching, this is just going to be very quick because these are the skills that line managers, that people need to have if they're going to utilize the coachable moment opportunities, the everyday coaching conversations. Coaches need to be great listeners. I think that goes without saying. They need to be able to structure a coaching conversation, whether it's a 15-minute conversation or a 60-minute conversation. You need the skills to be able to structure that conversation. And when it comes to structure, we use the GROW model. So if you're familiar with the GROW model, then that's what the structure is: the G for goal, R for reality, O for options, and the W for way forward. So that's just a structure that enables you to hold this conversation. You then need some process tools around how do I manage this conversation, all this information or data, as we call it in coaching. All this information is coming to me. So how do I manage that? How do I utilize that? How do I process that? How do I listen well, structure it, process it? And then at what point is it necessary for me to put my knowledge into this conversation? So these are the 4 key skills of coaching. And when we run our programs, whether that's an ILM program or a Leaders Coach program, we spend time exploring each of these 4 different areas. But if you just look at this little model here for now, folks, I just want you, again, a quick moment of self-reflection. How often in your current conversations at work do you go with the listening? So somebody appears at your desk and says, Derek, can you help me, please? And you say, sure, tell me what's your problem, what's the issue? what do you need from me, whatever it might be, and they tell you. So you do the listening, and then you go, yeah, I know what the problem is. Here's my knowledge, here's the solution. So in other words, there's no structure, there's no process. We just jump from listening to knowledge. And again, that's something to start noticing. Every time you jump from listening to knowledge, you potentially miss the opportunity for an everyday coaching conversation to take place. So we want you to think about that. So if you're jumping from listening to knowledge, try not to do that, please. And then just moving on from there, again, this is another framework which we use in our coaching programs, and it's around pulling information from people at the top end of the spectrum, the range, and pushing information on, as in solving someone's problem for them. And as a good coach, what we need to be able to do is flex our style and move up and down the framework. But again, if I was just to ask you to think about, in your conversations at work, where is your natural resting place on this range of approaches, then again, anecdotally, most participants in our programs tell us they around the making suggestions, the offering guidance, and the giving advice step. Say hello to your advice monster, folks, because this is the advice monster where we want to make suggestions, we want to offer guidance, we want to give advice. And what we're inviting you to do in these everyday coaching conversations is not to do that first. It might be necessary at some stage to make some suggestions, to offer guidance, to give advice, but don't do it first. Let's hear what the other person has to say. That's the thing that's really important. Let's listen. Let's reflect back and summarize and paraphrase. Let's ask some questions. Let's start to provide some input by giving feedback or share with them what we're noticing. And only then, when they've done all the hard work, should we start to think about making suggestions, offering guidance, and giving advice. And in these conversations, folks, if you find yourself in a role where you're doing a lot of instructing and telling because there's only one way of doing this, or because what maybe your colleague is suggesting there's something that's going to breach data protection or is against regulations and things like that, and so we're saying, no, please don't do that. Here's what you need to do. So that's instructing and that's telling. Well, then that's probably not an everyday coachable conversation opportunity because there's one right or wrong way of doing. And it's likewise if your role involves a lot of working with new people to the organization. When you're working with new people to the organization, they need a bit of time to understand and learn more about the role before you can start coaching them. But what you can coach new people on is the experience that they've had before in previous roles and bring that out from them and get them to work with that. So just to notice your advice monster, as Michael Bungay-Stanier calls it, and there's a fantastic TED talk, if you look into that, called Taming Your Advice Monster, that Michael Bungay-Stanier gives. Then the making suggestions, offering guidance, giving advice, just recognize if that's your default place on this range of approaches, think about what would it take for you to move up that line towards a more what we call non-directive approach, where we're pulling the answers from the people that we're working with. So that's the range of approaches, folks. That's your advice monster. Say hello, recognize it, think about taming it. And as I mentioned earlier, we use the GROW structure. So, or the to grow model, sorry, and the T is the topic. That's and effectively the topic presents itself when somebody comes to you and says, can you help me with this, please? There's the topic. It's the help that they need on this particular situation. When you say, tell me more, what's the problem? Or however you reply to, can I talk to you about this? Then we're straight into the reality of the situation. Having got some reality, we can then use those tools from the range of approaches to summarize and then say to our colleague, so Suze, what would you like to get from this session? What would be a useful way of the next 15 minutes? Suze articulates what the goal is, then we get some more reality, and then we move forward to, so what are the options? What have you tried so far is a reality question. What extra things could you try is an option question. And then as the conversation comes to an end, we have the wrap up, and then the next steps, the action planning, the commitment, and our colleague goes off to make things happen. Now, I just want to say with this framework, folks, this is the most widely used model. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. In a everyday coaching conversation, in 15 to 20 minutes, you won't always have time to get to the wrap up. But that's okay, because just the fact that you've had the conversation helps your colleague process their thoughts, helps your colleague raise this from the subconscious to the conscious mind, and helps them think about solutions in the future. So if you have to wrap up a conversation before you get a fully satisfactory outcome, that's fine, because what you can do is check back with your colleague in a couple of hours or tomorrow to see how their thinking has developed. And let's be honest, how many times have we been thinking about a problem today and thinking, I wonder what a solution is, and then suddenly tomorrow, out of nowhere, that solution jumps into your head. Well, that's what structuring these conversations does. It gives the brain the opportunity to process this, to keep thinking about it, either consciously or subconsciously, and it's amazing then what solutions will present themselves. So that's where we use and how we use the GROW model, whether it's in a 15-minute conversation or a 1-hour conversation. And so, folks, as I start to bring this kind of presentation to an end, I just want a couple of things then to think about. So in terms of summary, your leaders and managers, you need to utilize the opportunities that everyday coaching conversations present to grow and develop the people in your organization. You need either yourself, or if you're in a position, to equip leaders and managers with the necessary coaching skills if they're going to maximize the quality of those conversations. But leaders and managers need to change their behaviors from being helpful to being useful. So as a people leader, and I've been one in the past, when my advice monster came out, it came out because I wanted to help my colleague. I wanted to give them the answer. But what I'm saying is I need to stop giving them the answer and start developing their thinking for them. And that's why I'm going to invite them to be useful, or I'm going to be useful by inviting them to think about what they're going to do next. So that's a summary of what I've shared with you today, folks. And really then, I want you to think about what are the next steps for you personally? What does your organization need to do to maximize the opportunity that everyday coaching conversations present? And if you think you'd like to talk to us and get some outside support, outside help, then we're here to support you and work with you. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment while you think about those questions for yourself. And then I'm going to invite you, if you've got questions, to drop them into the Q&A, and I'll do my best to answer them in the kind of 10 minutes that we've got from here. Marianne, thanks for getting us started. Great question. How do you define the difference between being helpful and being useful to line managers? I think you share examples with them, Marianne. So I think we can recognize and share the idea that if we are going to change our style, that we share with them that when we give them the answer, that's us being helpful, but us giving them the answer doesn't develop their thinking, doesn't grow them as a person, doesn't necessarily help them play their best game. So if I want them to play their best game will be played when they're more bought in, more committed, utilizing their knowledge, their energy, their skills, their resources, etc. And so I'm therefore going to start to change my style by getting them to do more thinking. And we often use the analogy, Marianne, of heavy lifting. Who's going to do the heavy lifting here? And if you have an everyday coaching conversation, and as the manager, you come out with more on your to-do list than the person that came into the conversation, then you've got that balance wrong. So it's about saying to them, no, you're going to do the work. Yeah, I'm here to help you and support you, but ultimately, you're going to own this issue, you're going to own the solution, and you're going to own the action plan. Vicky, I'm going to come to your question next. So do we have a bank of go-to coaching questions that never fail you? The answer is not really. And the reason I say not really is because that would allow coaching to be a science rather than an art. Yeah, what I can tell you though, Vicky, is that there are lots of questions out there, and you can even buy books on coaching questions. And what we do is give people guidance around questions for the G part of the GROW framework, the R, the O, the W, and then we look at various other questions as well. But what experience tells us, and experienced coaches I'm sure will share this with you as well, is that if you use the tool of summarizing, so in other words, reflecting back and summarizing what the person said to you, you'll be amazed how often the right question will just appear in your mind. Whereas if you get hung up on what's the next question that I'm going to ask, you will typically find yourself focusing on the question, not listening to what the other person says. And I do have a cheat question though, Vicky, that I would share with you, and which is not to be used every time, can only be used occasionally, but just occasionally, if I have no question to ask and my mind is really blank, then that's the question I ask. So if I was coaching you, Vicky, and I really didn't know what question to ask you, then my question would be, Vicky, what's the best question I could ask you now to help you move this forward? And I'd let you as the coachee come up with that question, and then you could answer it for yourself. So there's my cheat or my hack, if you like, to enable me to do that. Henry, so thank you, Vicky. That's that question. Moving on, Henry, do I feel that could work? I think they potentially could. I think group coaching, Henry, is a much more complex topic to work with because of the fact that you've got, half a dozen different people. So I think group learning, I'm a big fan of utilizing group learning to help everyday coaching conversations, but I just think there are different dynamics involved. But yes, fundamentally, I think the principles would work the same within group coaching. Top tips to tame the advice monster, Anya. Great question, thank you. Notice it is the first thing. Notice that when you are in the moment and when the answer pops into your head, notice it. And then once it's popped in your head, try and stop yourself. Even to the extent where if you have shared with your colleague what you're trying to do, and this comes back to I think the first question, how do you make the difference between being useful and being helpful? If you share the terminology with your team, and I say to my team, let's say, Anya, you're on my team, and I say, Anya, I've got this thing called the advice monster, and my advice monster comes out when I give you advice and guidance and make suggestions. I'm going to try and tame it. I'm going to work hard to tame it, but would you help me tame it, please? So every time my advice monster comes out and I start telling you what the answer is, stop me and say, Derek, I don't want your advice right now, thank you. I want your help in developing my thinking. And that's why one of the things I asked you about what are your next steps is to just think about how do we communicate the behavioral changes that we're looking for our people leaders, our line managers to make to go to a more coaching approach to their leadership style. So that would be my top tip, noticing it myself and asking other people to call it out. And I've even seen some people leaders, Anya, where they've been so keen to stop themselves doing this that they've even offered to make a donation to charity, like a swear box, as we used to call it in the old days, but a donation to charity. If my advice monster comes out at a time that you don't want to hear it, tell me and I'll give £1 to our charity. Yeah, so and if you're from me, like me, from Yorkshire, and money's involved, you'll soon change your behaviours. So thank you for that one, Anya. And let me move on to Andrea's then. How can we best develop our line managers? So great question. So I think my experience of that, Andrea, is to put them through some form of coaching skills program. So our Leader as Coach program is a 3-day program, or a 9-module over 9 2-hour modules, where we take people through the example of the lead, manage, coach. We do more work around understanding what I'm doing when I'm wearing the different hats, and then we give people the coaching skills in much more detail than I've been able to articulate today, and then we give them the opportunity to practice, because I think the coaching skills only come from practice. And I know lots of managers hate role play and things like that. We don't like role play either, but what we do want is real play. So if you think about it, we've all got things on our to-do list. We're all working with projects where our thoughts are still unformed and unstructured. Well, that's an opportunity for an everyday coaching conversation. So I can bring a topic to the table, and my coach can work with me, practice on helping me. I get something from the practice, and they get something from the conversation as well, because they get to practice their skills. But I think with all these things, Andrea, for me, it's all about starting with recognition. So if I think about, I need to articulate what I'm doing when I'm wearing my leader's hat, what I'm doing when I'm wearing my manager's hat, what I'm doing where I'm wearing my coach's hat. And then I need to start identifying, where am I spending my time at the moment? So is the 60-70% rule, is that true for my organization? And if it is, what does that mean? And then how can I transition to doing more coaching? Well, I can transition to doing more coaching by recognizing where the coachable, everyday coachable coaching conversation opportunities are. And then once I recognize where they are, then I can start to utilize those opportunities. So I think it's, you know, which hats do I start on? Everybody is always wearing one of those hats anyway. We need to start by recognizing and noticing what's the hat that I'm wearing. So thank you, Andrea. In answer, Maureen, to your question, this is where on the range of approaches, we do need to be flexible. Yeah, if we genuinely feel that the coachee has explored everything within their capability, their capacity, their thoughts, their knowledge, then that's when we maybe need to be a bit more directive. So we may need to offer suggestions, guidance, advice in that stage. So in other words, but what we need to do, Maureen, is not be afraid of silence, not be afraid of letting them process everything, really look for solutions. I think sometimes because of the need for speed, then we get a couple of seconds of silence and think, oh, I better jump in here. And what we need to do is to be able to recognize, when is that the person that we're working with, what's their thinking face look like? When do I think they're still thinking? And then how do I move it on from here? So at that stage, only after I'm convinced I've explored everything with them, do I put something in the pot, if you like, the metaphorical pot, add something to the conversation that gives them a suggestion, a solution, an option, a way forward, if I've got one. Great. So, folks, thank you very much. I'm conscious it's 12:43. I'm going to take Tony's as the last question then. Thanks for popping that in, Tony. Yes, so absolutely, Tony is the answer, because I was the biggest fan of the Advice Monster when I worked in organizations. Yeah, so before I trained as a coach, the coach training that I did was really more around formal coaching rather than informal coaching. So we focused on coaching, and because I was at a senior level, I was entitled to a coach. And so we kind of focused on that one-to-one coaching, and we spent less time focusing on the everyday opportunities. And what we're seeing, and this is part of the big shift, if you like, in, which is a much too broad topic for today, but just how the world is changing post-COVID, post-lockdown, post-everything like that, that people want a different style of leadership. What we're noticing is people want a different style of leadership, and that leadership needs to be leader-coach rather than leader-manage. As you may have gathered from how I appear on the screen, then I'm old enough to remember when it was leader manage was the way of doing things, and that was the expectation. And you got promoted on your longevity, on your experience, on knowing how the job got done. And I think there's much less of that now, and a much more need for a more flexible, more agile workforce. And that only comes when we help people develop their own thinking. So yeah, definitely. Thank you, folks. That's great. Thank you very much indeed. It is a 1:45, so I'm going to say a huge thank you to everyone for coming along. Just to identify then, we've done the questions there. And so if you weren't familiar with us, if you don't know who Coaching Focus are, this is us. We're a coach-led consultancy with a global reach. We operate all over the world. Team of best-in-class change consultants and coaches. And our ultimate goal and the core thread that runs through everything is coaching for a better tomorrow. Yeah, how can we help people be better, and how can we help people be better tomorrow? So thank you very much for coming along. If you think we can help you, if you want to continue the conversation on, then please reach out to us. We'd be delighted to hear from you. We'd be delighted to enter into conversation with you. I thank you very much indeed for your time. I wish you well, and hope that we might see you again sometime. Thank you very much, everyone, and good afternoon.